Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Sara Mehle, ESG Index Strategist with Nasdaq Global Indexes, to discuss multiple themes that we're seeing across the indexes, including asset classes and different regions. Sara, it's great to see you. Welcome back to Trade Talks.
Hey, Jill, great to be here. Thanks.
All right, and let's take a look at the first slide here, where it has a general overview of how multiple asset classes performed in February.
Yeah, so generally speaking, we saw continued broad underperformance across equities, both within the U.S. and globally. In fact, of the about 100 indexes that we track here at Nasdaq, about 70% of them finished in the red in February, with an average loss of about 3%. So this was not as extreme as we saw in January, when we saw about 90% of the indexes finish in the red with an average loss of about 7%. But it goes to show that February was yet another weak month in terms of performance, especially for the Nasdaq Composite and the Nasdaq 100. And we did see some dispersion here from small and mid-cap stocks, as they actually finished up for the month. Small caps led the way with about the Nasdaq US Small Cap Index led the way with a return of about 70 bips. So, and then we can't forget about those commodity related equities. We also saw strong performance there, as we saw the Felix Gold Silver Sector Index finish up over 14%, which was an impressive return for February.
Yeah, it certainly is impressive, and equally impressive is what we saw in alternative forms of energy and the way it performed in February versus the month it had in January.
Right, so we saw solar and wind within the Nasdaq OMX Green Economy Suite finish up for the month of February. This comes after a month where we saw solar finish with strongly negative returns. So we saw solar here have a pretty strong turnaround, finishing up a little over 11%, while we saw the Nasdaq OMX Wind Index finish up 10%. We also saw continued outperformance, relatively speaking, of course, from Canadian dividend and international dividend achiever strategies, with the Nasdaq International Dividend Achievers finishing up 30 basis points, while the Nasdaq Select Canadian Dividend Index finished up 40 basis points. So some strength there, but overall generally negative when we look in those particular related indexes.
And Sara, let's switch gears for a moment and take a look at the market from a momentum perspective when we look at the Nasdaq Dorsey Wright sets of indexes.
So this month we saw, a bunch of the Dorsey Wright momentum-based indexes finish in positive territory. One thing I just wanted to point out here is just that Dorsey Wright Energy Technical Leaders Index. We saw that finish up just under 10% for the month of February. That comes after an extremely strong January. We continue to see this index print new all-time highs just with activity in the recent weeks. We also saw strength from basic materials as well as those small cap leaders. So we're going to continue to watch that energy story here, but those momentum leaders really have continued to drive the story there within that index.
And Sara, to wrap up here, when you look at it from a thematics perspective, where did you see the relative outperformance?
Sure. So within thematics, we saw green energy and wind outperform in the month of February. And while, really here the story this year really has been around the general weakness we've seen in the broad tech sector, I think something really interesting to point out here is just the outperformance we saw within cybersecurity. So the Nasdaq CTA Cybersecurity Index finished up over 5%. And on the other side of the spectrum, for the performance spectrum, we saw the Nasdaq Internet Index finish down 10%. So, while we have seen broader tech underperform, there are some, pockets of strength, which really just signals that dispersion that we're seeing play out there within the broader tech sector. But and that's something definitely to keep an eye on as we finish out and we move through the month of March.
All right, Sara, appreciate the insight as always. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.